My job requires vax even for people who WFH, what does that mean? And have no patient contact. Oh, work from home and have no patient contact. I filed religious exemption. Their denial twisted my claims. They're denying anyone without a church and pastor. My beliefs are independent. I intend to file with the EEOC. You have to tell us what that is, Robert, for religious discrimination advice. Now, Robert, I'm going to go upstairs and get the dog, but give us the update on the vaccine mandate lawsuits. And if you can offer some advice on that, I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Sure. So for that individual, I mean, my view is that violates, that's religious discrimination. And so if it's a state actor, then it's a constitutional claim. If it's not a state actor, it's a private employer or private institution, then it's a civil rights claim, Title VII claim, which makes clear you can't discriminate against someone based on their religious beliefs. And you can't require they have church approval. You can't, I mean, they are converting the vaccine mandate into a second check on on whether or not someone's religious beliefs are okay or not. This is absolutely, I mean, this is beyond, there's already issues with the vaccine mandate from those of us who are concerned with its constitutional impact and legal impact, discriminatory impact, but they're using it as a pretext to decide whose religious beliefs are really religious beliefs or not, which ones are religiously approved by the state. The state of Washington's been one of the worst, but in my view, you don't have to go through the EEOC that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You don't have to go through them at all to file suit in most cases. So sometimes people are misled into believing that the EEOC probably won't do anything one way or the other under the Biden administration because discrimination is just fine in the Biden administration in terms of how its policies have gone to date. So, but the state of Washington, I'll be breaking down in detail a good letter that was written by the Liberty Counsel to the governor in the state of Washington, which got their hands on some emails that made it clear the state's intentions were to find excuses to deny people their religious exemptions and religious objections. This is happening somewhat in the military as well. There's massive pressure being put on military commanders and people in the hierarchy to deny religious objections, even though the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act applies strict scrutiny to religious accommodations in the military context and to all federal employees. So all federal employees are protected under they have to show strict scrutiny. And so far, as happened this week in Michigan, that was a religious objection issue. The university refused to recognize the religious objection, and the federal court overruled the university's decision and issued an injunction against the university requiring those students to be allowed to participate in sports because it was a clear-cut First Amendment violation and because they cannot meet strict scrutiny. And then, in fact, to my knowledge, not a single one of these public health interventions, lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, have been able to survive or sustain themselves on an evidentiary basis when strict scrutiny is applied. So I think all of that's discrimination.
Now, Robert, someone had asked, are you speaking in the U.S. specifically or at large? You're speaking U.S., but for those of us who don't know how this process works, like for someone who's experiencing this for the first time, they have an employer, government or private, who says, show me your proof as of whatever date it's going to be required. Someone wants to raise a religious exemption. What is the process like administratively that they have to go through? Do they have to go get a letter from a religious leader, a priest, a rabbi, an imam, or how does it actually work?
Your religious objections are whatever your religious beliefs are. You don't have to get approval from anybody. It's not protection of organized religion. We don't have church and state in the United States for a reason. And that would be trying to institute a state religion. Like, here's the religious beliefs that are okay, and here's the ones that aren't. It's your own individual religious beliefs, period. And frankly, the end of the inquiry, when someone asserts a religious objection, that's it. And the attempts to go beyond that almost invariably and inevitably will constitute discrimination against someone based on their religious beliefs. So employers are taking massive risks. It's because all the powerful stakeholders are on their side. But there have now been 2 federal court decisions in the last 2 weeks invalidating the attempts to deny people religious objections. So by now they should start to figure out even the courts aren't going along with this.
But when they deny the medical exemption, religious exemption, when the employer denies to raise the religious exemption, verbal, I mean, you don't need to fill out a form. And when they deny it,
I mean, that depends by employer. But what I'm advising to people is first get the policy, see what the policy is. A lot of employers don't want to give the policy because often there isn't one. They're trying to get away with coercion by deception. Kind of like, I'll do a further breakdown on this, but there's a coming suit against the FDA. I'll do a detailed breakdown at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, where people can also find detailed breakdowns of the Hawaii suit, Michigan suit, Louisiana suit, New York suit, and all the other suits that are pending across the country, as well as that Liberty Counsel letter to the state of Washington that what they're doing violates a whole range of religious discrimination laws. The U.S. Constitution, the state Constitution of Washington, also the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to states, also state laws that are often applicable in this context. So there's multiple suits in California that I also break down that are related to this issue. But basically, what I'm telling everybody, first get a copy of the actual policy. They should have one. If they don't have one, that should be a warning sign that they're not. What exactly are they proposing? I mean, what are they instituting?
And I presume a lot of employers probably don't have this codified anywhere in any, conduct book, because no one had ever contemplated the idea of forced vaccination in the first place. So, I mean, I presume they would find this in their terms of employment. They'll have an employment contract that refers to company policies.
Well, almost every major employer has some human resources department and has some sort of company policies in some form. And even if it's a smaller scale employer, they should be able to articulate what the policy is. Presumably, they will have consulted with corporate counsel before they instituted the policy. And in many instances, I think what their corporate lawyers are advising is to not put anything in writing so that they can, come up with flexible arguments after the fact, like they kind of did with that Virginia case we'll talk about, where they came up with different explanations for their actions after they got caught doing something wrong. So that's where ask for the full policy. Say, okay, just what's the policy? Find out, are there religious exemptions? Are there medical exemptions? Are there conscientious objections? Are there reasonable accommodations being made as alternatives? Such as, all of this is about asymptomatic risk. None of this is about symptomatic risk. If somebody's symptomatic, you can have them stay at home. If someone's been exposed, you can have them stay at home. So this is only dealing with people who have not been knowingly exposed, who may have asymptomatic COVID, for which there is no evidence of significant. By my estimate, those odds are about 1,000,000 to 1 that someone that is asymptomatic will spread COVID in a way that's going to kill somebody.
And now, if I may,
pleadings in California, they say there's no evidence of anybody doing it.
I'm gonna drop the Eric Hunley. He has a little graph that he flashes when he says demonetize. I'm just gonna flash the graphic that says not medical advice, not doctor's advice. This is Robert Barnes' own personal opinion assessment. But I think the bottom line is,
well, in this case, I'm just recounting what's been alleged in federal court.
And by and large, while the idea is that asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic transmission is possible, the question is at what levels to justify this type of violation of civil rights and liberties, because first of all, you're already dealing with a population that is quite vaccinated. I don't know what the stats are overall in the United States, but you're dealing with a population that by and large is already largely vaccinated. So you're talking about the risk that the minority or unvaccinated pose to the extent that they are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic is, the odds, we don't know what the odds are, but they seem astronomical, or at the very least, sufficiently unlikely to justify the measure.
Even Fauci himself admitted that it's very, very rare to hear of asymptomatic spread. And definitely to hear it spread, because the concern isn't that somebody else spreads COVID. The concern is that they spread COVID that causes severe harm. Otherwise, we carry all kinds of viruses. If the goal was to prevent any virus from ever being transmitted of any kind, nobody could go to work at all. That's not a practicable alternative.
Well, or is that exactly where this is all going to go? The flu vaccine has never been mandatory, but
it has in some context. For nurses and nursing homes, occasionally it has been. And that's of note because federal courts have already ruled that overruling a religious objection in the context of flu vaccine mandates is illegal. So if it was illegal for flu vaccine mandates in the nursing and healthcare context, why wouldn't it be illegal for everybody else where you don't even have those sensitivities at issue? So particularly for this vaccine, for this virus, So there's nothing about this vaccine with this virus that would change the legal analysis under the religious discrimination laws. And so far, again, nobody has been able to get past strict scrutiny so far on any of these issues, whether it's a vaccine mandate, mask mandate, anything else. The cases that have survived in court have been decided on a rational basis review, not on strict scrutiny. And to my knowledge, no court has greenlit any refusal to honor a religious objection. The only 4 cases I know of, 2 in the COVID context, 2 in the flu vaccine context, all of them ruled that the employer or university or state actor was violating religious discrimination laws by not honoring religious objections. And there's a long history of the Supreme Court making very clear that it does not matter if you have organized religion support. It does not matter if people of your same faith disagree with you. It does not matter any of those aspects. Your religious beliefs are your individual beliefs of religious conscience. And checking whether it's sincere or not is nothing more than the state attempting to impose its own views on what's acceptable religious practice and not. And that's precisely what's always been illegal in America.
Now, someone had asked the chat, let me just bring it back up here. It might be too far down the line. It was the question about religious exemptions. Aren't religious exemptions governed by the consistent with this nation's history and traditions clause?
That might be a different. Are they talking about Canada?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know what it means, but like, I don't.
That's not something we typically use. I mean, for us, it's the First Amendment in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and relevant applicable state laws. And I mean, on the issue of natural immunity, that's where a lot of other suits are pending, and a lot of medical evidence has been admitted into court, which I do go into more detail at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, since the big boys here at YouTube don't like us talking about these dissident pieces of information, even when they're in court filings, even when they're affidavits and declarations under oath you're talking about Harvard doctors, Stanford doctors, Oxford doctors. You're not talking about just anybody. So, these major people are attesting to these statements about whether natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. And so, but I get into what's discussed in court there, but that is part of all of these court filings is the allegation that that's the case.
And even in Quebec, and I believe Canada, even natural immunity is not sufficient for an exemption. You are still required, if I'm not mistaken, to take 1 shot, not 2, because the COVID immunity, natural immunity, has given you the equivalent of 1 shot of the jab. So
according to Israel, you're going to need a 4th shot pretty soon. And according to other people, you're going to need shots every couple of months. That's what's coming.
It's good. It's good business for Pfizer. That's for sure. I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to leave it up, and I'm not going to read it for obvious reasons. It's an interesting insight. I have always been reluctant to anybody watching the channel. I don't like the analogies. With Gina Carano, that issue. The analogies are sometimes inappropriate. The analogies are sometimes cliched and overused.
I think it's very analogous to the eugenics era in America, which was used as the legal, political, and moral pretext and justification of the Nazi regime. But eugenics era was bad by itself enough. And we're reinstating in the same logic that now, I guess that transitions to our first case in this context. A Colorado federal court ruled on a temporary restraining order that a class action group of soldiers filed on grounds that since they had natural immunity, they should not be required to take the vaccine, while he allowed more evidence to later be developed. He denied the temporary restraining order, in part because what exactly is happening in the military is far from clear. It appears they're playing lots of games. There'll be some news stories breaking on that this week. There may have been internal communications by military officers where they are knowingly misleading soldiers about what's happening. And so and in fact, there'll be a suit against the FDA. The FDA is currently advertising something that is patently false. I won't get into what it is. Get into that at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But the federal court said, well, the CDC says something different, so I'm not going to issue any temporary restraining order. And, I wonder why that judge should just send his paycheck back to the government, give up his robe, give up his job, quit taking taxpayers' money, because we have 3 branches of government for a reason. And if we're just going to defer to the executive branch, they get to pass the laws. So, skip the legislative branch. They get to enforce and decide and adjudicate the laws. So skip the judicial branch. What use is that judge if that judge is going to defer to the executive branch? His job and duty is to supervise, oversee, and allow evidence to be presented that questions and contests the executive branch, not just say, well, the executive branch told me. Then you're useless. You're a waste of space.
Well,
the judiciary branch doesn't exist.
They're there to affirm the decisions taken by the administration's appointees and administrative entities. I mean, that's what I'm.
They're rubber stamps. That judge should quit writing opinions. Just get yourself a rubber stamp to whenever the government says something. It's disgraceful, that decision.
So hold on, go into the facts of it a little bit. I don't know it very well. The soldiers are filing class action. They were seeking a temporary restraining order enjoining from compulsion of administration of the vaccine.
Exactly, because I mean the problem is there's usually an administrative exhaustion of remedies process for soldiers. It's not clear they're going to allow that to happen here, or at least they're misleading soldiers into believing that's not going to happen. I'm getting emails every day of somebody who's a soldier related to a soldier that says, my son, my daughter, or I myself have been told I have 24 hours to get the vaccine or I'm going to get dishonorably discharged. And a dishonorable discharge has lots of effects.
Stop there. Dishonorably discharged. This is not exaggeration. This is not misinformation. They're going to get dishonorably discharged, and not just, I don't know, is there honorable or just regular discharge?
Oh yeah, big difference. Dishonorable discharge has a wide range of consequences. Some are being threatened with jail time. I mean, some are being told that they will be jailed if they don't get it. I mean, so they'll be dishonorably discharged and put in prison. Now, I believe a lot of these military officials that are telling them this are misleading them, because I don't believe this policy has yet been affirmed in writing anywhere. It's like all the games they're all playing. Coercion by deception is taking place en masse in this context. And you have to ask yourself, if this is such a great, safe, and effective vaccine, why do you have to rely on coercion and deception? As even CNN ran a story today saying major experts are saying this methodology is going to increase skepticism about vaccines, not increase confidence in it.
I cannot disclose who I had this conversation with, but someone who's in the industry, in the sciences, in the medicines, and they said this entire process is going to make people who would otherwise not be skeptical of other vaccines skeptical, hesitant of all government, and exacerbate other problems where up to now there have never been other problems. Because once you do something like this, once the government is perceived as the threat and not a legitimate institution, you're going to not listen to the otherwise potentially justifiable things that the government is doing. It is. I've had this discussion also with people in the protests. It turns people against everything and not just the wrong things when the government resorts to these types of tactics.
Absolutely. So the Colorado case was class action for people who have already had COVID in the military, who don't want to be forced to take the current vaccine, or forced to choose between that and dishonorable discharge. I mean, to give you an example, if you're dishonorably discharged, you can't own a gun the rest of your life. I mean, there's all kinds of consequences that flow from it. So this kind of and not only that, little history lesson. The most experimented group on the population more experimented on than any other group in the entire American history has been soldiers. This goes back to mustard gas and MK Ultra and Agent Orange and whatever happened in Iraq and the experimental anthrax vaccine and on and on and on. They love to experiment on soldiers, which is really disgraceful. I mean, the people that do the most and risk the most for the country are the most abused by our own government. And so they filed a class action saying we have medical and scientific evidence, and they attached a declaration from a prominent doctor who also accounted for all of the other studies, all the other reviews, all the other data that shows why they believe that they are not at risk, that they present less risk than the unvaccinated, than someone who's vaccinated but has not had it before.
And this is confirmed by the stats and the numbers and the reports coming out of Israel that natural immunity is, I don't know how many times stronger and longer than
at least six times stronger in the Israeli study. So there's a lot of data to support that. There's a wide range of reasons for it. I break it down in the California lawsuit that was filed by a professor on this. But so they asked for a temporary restraining order to say at least hold off any mandate, hold off any consequence, any disciplinary consequence until the court can resolve this. And part of it was the court said, I need more detail about what's really at risk. And part of that is they weren't sure. They were just trying to get to the court before something bad could happen. But the most problematic aspect of the court's ruling was the court was like, well, the CDC has said you should still get it. So, what am I doing here? I just have a rubber stamp. CDC, CDC, CDC. It's an embarrassment. Long history of the judiciary deferring, becoming nothing more than clerks for the military, or clerks for the public health authorities, or clerks for abusive tyrants of any kind. And in our own American history, this goes way, way back. But it's an embarrassing aspect, and I think it's one that needs to continue to be confronted directly. Yeah, are you a rubber stamp if you're a federal judge? Is that what you're there to do? Just listen to what the CDC says?
They dismissed the TRO, temporary restraining order, which is sort of like the most emergency type injunction. What impact does that have on the class certification? Have they gotten there yet, or
no? I mean, it's just a very preliminary stage, and it's because the Biden administration is playing games with its own soldiers. There's conflicting information all over the place. There's what's in writing. There's what's not in writing. Different soldiers are being told different things at different times. Like I said, it's really mass coercion by often mass deception. It looks like they're going to set up a different administrative appeals process that's going to be limited and restricted. They're being told they're getting one thing when they're actually getting something else. They're being told they have certain legal remedies that they don't actually have. Being told that they don't have legal remedies that they likely do have. And so it's extraordinary what's taking place. At the same time that they're getting blown up and killed in Afghanistan because of our incompetent administration at the top of the military, which goes beyond Biden. It goes to Milley and that whole crew of losers.
It's atrocious. Now, I've moved my mic away from my face, so if this is too soft, everyone let me know in the chat sooner than later. Sue with what now? Do they go with...
There's a bunch more suits being filed. So because people are trying to figure out... I mean, I'll be filing a suit this week that indirectly implicates this. That will challenge the FDA directly for what they're doing. But because it has impact on the military. The military is operating under the pretext that they're issuing one vaccine when they're issuing a legally distinct one. And that has major legal consequences potentially. And that's just one aspect of what's taken place. And I know of other people that are looking at suit. It's tricky in the military because traditionally you had to exhaust administrative remedies first within the military structure before you could file suit. The thing here is they appear to be short-circuiting that administrative appeals process and escalating the threat level if you don't take it. I mean, big difference between, just leaving the force and having a dishonorable discharge. And like I said, people are being threatened with prison time in the military for not taking the vaccine.
And now the question I was about to ask, someone had said that you can't be dishonorably discharged without without a court martial. I know nothing of this. So
that's the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It has an extensive process. And that's where there should be certain rules put in place. They should be, but it's not clear that they are, and they're being told different things. And some of these people are stationed overseas, right? And that are doing, national security work on a daily basis. So, why they decide to use the military as their guinea pig for, I get why historically they always treat them as guinea pigs. They see them as disposable. Madeleine Albright said, what good are soldiers if we don't use them, even if that means they die? And Colin Powell responded, they're not playthings on a risk board. Back when Colin Powell was a little more honorable. That's the nature of what's taken place, and it's going to lead to. From what I've heard, some of the military is reconsidering everything, talking about delaying everything for 90 days because they didn't expect the blowback that they're getting, and up to 40% of Marines, according to some information, don't want to get the vaccine. Those are some of the most hardcore military people in the world. And maybe we should not be worried about injecting these people with something, especially at this point in time. But that shows you the mindset of this current administration.
I'm curious as to what the potential motivation, without getting into the sinister, potential theories. What is the thought process? What is the rationale to jam this down the military, knowing that it will force people out of the military, that it will cause discord and strife among what is, arguably one of the most essential institutions of a country? What is the rationale for the panic? Is it incompetence? Is it something more sinister? In your humble opinion, Robert?
There's two alternative explanations. One is that they sincerely believe the hysteria about the virus and sincerely believe that it poses imminent, massive risks to wide numbers of people, and that if they don't vaccinate everybody fast, that Walking Dead will become a walking reality. That's one interpretation of their motivations. Another interpretation is that it's a governmental experimentation in power to see if they can control what they put in your body. That means the government really has complete control over you. What other rights do you really have at the end of the day? That's why in our own law, American law, it's good. Battery is considered the most ancient and well-respected tort because it's the number one thing you have. If you don't control your own body, what do you control? And what freedoms do you have if you don't have the freedom over what goes into your own body physically? And that's why it's for the critics, the concern is that that's the motive and objection, to set a precedent that the government or private companies control your body. You don't.
All right. And we got E. Johnson says, I'm a military lawyer about to retire and happy to help you pro bono when I'm done. You know where to reach, Barnes. You know where to find us. And thank you very much for the super chat. Now, Robert, you did say there was some good news coming out of the vaccine mandate lawsuits. What's the good news?
So two pieces of good news. One is that there's massive litigation being filed. Suits. I mean, I've at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I break it all down at each of the cases, but you're talking about suits in Maine, multiple suits in Michigan, suits in Florida, suits in California, suits in Washington, and I think it was, and suits in New York. Those are just the cases that I've covered. It doesn't include all the other cases that have been or in the process of being brought. There are going to be hundreds and more likely thousands of lawsuits over this. And it's something I don't think they expected. And some of it's about religious objection issues. Some of it's about medical exceptions, particularly natural immunity issues. Some of it's about the doctor-patient relationship, because there's some states and employers that are trying to deny you your medical exemption unless a doctor that they recognize as an acceptable doctor signs off, while doctors are reporting in multiple places, that even in places like Arkansas, that they have been threatened with losing their medical license if in a medical investigation, if they give exemptions, any exemptions.